Judy Simpson and Nick Faldo join Ian Botham and Norman Whiteside and Alan Lamb team up with Bill Beaumont. In half an hour here on 2, Thora Heard is Alan Bennett's talking head in A Cream Cracker Under the Settee. Not a cream cracker in sight now, but plenty of other tasty morsels from Chris Kelly, Michael Barry and Jill Goulden in the Food and Drink.
In Food and Drink this week, the Green Revolution. Organic food production is booming. Will all farming go this way? Patterned, potted or delicately pickled. 3 delicious recipes for eggs. And our latest challenge. An Italian restaurateur cooks Sunday lunch for a London fire crew. His budget is £1.50 a head. Hello and welcome again to Food and Drink. 2 weeks ago, Joyce Pinnell wrote to us saying that onions and garlic are revolting and we should stop using them. Well, I'm glad to say the garlic lobby is at last fighting back, as you'd expect. Peter Bartram, that is, of Market Drayton, has sent you a jar of his garlic paste for your delectation. If it tastes as good as it smells, it'll do.
Oh, it's wonderful. Not only does it smell delicious, it's also very good for what ails you. At least it's for what ails most of us. I don't know if it'd cure what ails you.
Now, kind.
I've got something that's good for what ails you too, so some believe. I'm looking at herbal teas, both the single variety and the mixtures. They're low in caffeine, very low in calories, high in flavour, some wonderfully so, some a bit less so, but you should try for yourself, see which suits.
Tea time with Goulden later then. But first this week, the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food, MAF for short, is celebrating its 100th anniversary this year amidst a growing clamour for a radical shake-up, if not abolition. According to its critics, at the heart of the ministry there lies a fundamental conflict of interest. How, they ask, can it possibly represent the interests of the food producers at the same time as those of the consumers? The root of the problem lies some years back. In World Wars I and II, we set up a specialist Ministry of Food to boost food production.
We cannot produce or import enough fruit in wartime, but we are growing more green vegetables to take their place.
In 1939, Britain imported more than half of her food. Through the efforts of the ministry in the agricultural industry during the war and afterwards, by the 1950s we were largely self-sufficient. Productivity and agricultural subsidies were the order of the day. But the responsibility was still split between the Ministry of Food and the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries, whose origins were in the 19th century. The two were amalgamated in 1955. The Times greeted the new Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries and Food thus:
the worst of all possible alternatives. It is asking too much of any minister to be able to hold the balance between the interests of the consumer and the powerful agricultural interest.
Prescient words, perhaps. Today, 30 years later, MAF still has to hold the balance between the consumer and the food producers, whether farmers or manufacturers. It has specialist laboratories for testing foods and committees for approving such things as pesticides, additives and labelling. And it's here that some argue consumers are not given a fair crack of the whip. For instance, during the recent egg crisis, it seemed Edwina Currie from the Department of Health made all the running for the consumer, while John McGregor, the Minister of Agriculture, had his time taken up with the egg producers. Next week we'll be hearing from the Minister. Today we're inviting 3 of MAF's chief critics to put the case for its abolition. Professor Richard Lacey is Professor of Medical Microbiology at Leeds University. Now, many critics say, Professor, that MAF cannot guarantee the safety of the food supply. In view of the fact that we've so much concern now about salmonella in eggs and listeria indeed, do you agree with it?
I do. I think our figures for food poisoning now are the worst ever. They're real. They aren't artificial. And I think that the problem is cumulative from the poor quality of the food in the first place, from the distribution, the slaughtering and the selling in the shops. And I can't see how one agency can represent the views and interests of the consumer and the producer. The issue is quite obvious that the more profit the producers and farmers make, the poorer the quality of the food for the consumer.
Now, some people would say that what you're saying is scaremongering.
Scaremongering, I think this is an honest concern for the welfare of the public.
Thank you very much. Sir Richard Boddy MP is a farmer and former chairman of the Select Committee on Agriculture. To go back to the Times piece of 30 years ago, is it true, as they suggested then, that there is a grave danger that MAF will be, and indeed is, in the pockets of the producers?
That's absolutely true. But I think the key point here is that we would never have had this tremendous increase in production if it had not been for the chemical and pharmaceutical industries. And as a result of what they've achieved in terms of technology, a very cosy relationship has developed between the Ministry of Agriculture and these commercial interests. And one of the results of that is that the various committees that have been set up to safeguard the consumer have been weighted very much in favour of those interests.
So in order to redress the balance, would you now like to see a new Ministry of Food?
Absolutely. I think the case is unanswerable. We need a Department of Food and Health. We want to put those two together, and that would be quite rational, and that's the way forward.
Dr. Tim Lang is director of the London Food Commission, an independent consumer watchdog. At the moment, when MAF assesses things like additives or pesticides, it works on three main criteria. That's safety, quality, and efficacy. Do you think perhaps there's a need for a fourth which more directly reflects the concerns of the consumer?
I think it needs to be this one word, need. Do we as consumers need it? Do we want it? That should be a major priority at the moment, and far too often it isn't.
So are you two advocating a totally new agency?
I think we need a Ministry of Food which takes consumers and the public health interest and puts it right at the top of their daily aims and objectives. At the moment, too often, the benefit of doubt is given to the producer's interests. We think it should be the other way around. It should be to consumers and the public health.
Dr. Lang. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. Convincing arguments, do you think? Well, next week, the Minister of Agriculture himself, John McGregor, will be putting his side of the argument. Is he neglecting the consumer or not? Julie.
I hope you'll warn your guests, Chris, that I'm going to ask their help a bit later on. I'm looking this week at herbal teas, known as tisanes. They're enjoying a great surge of interest at the moment. Herbal teas, of course, have been around for centuries. They were formerly considered more serious mainstays of the medicine cupboard, though, than something amusing to drink. I've been reminded recently, reading to my children, that Peter Rabbit had to have some chamomile tea after a surfeit of lettuce leaves. Now, chamomile is one of the most obvious of these teas. I'd like to point out to you what it looks like, and I'd also like to quote you from John Gerard's Herbal. This was first published in 1633, as to what it was alleged to do to you. It says here it's good against coldness in the stomach, sour belchings, voideth wind, and mightily bringeth down the monthly courses. Some stuff, this chamomile. So let's see what it tastes like. I happen to know what it tastes like because it's one of my aversions, but don't let that put you off. It smells like a weed. It smells just like the plant looks. Very yeasty. I'm not going to drink it now. I drank so much when I was pregnant. I've had a surfeit. Try it out yourself. The next one I want to look at is elderflower. Now, this is supposed to be good for catarrh and sinus. Now, I never thought I'd be stumped, but finally I am. I can't think of any way to describe exactly what the scent and flavour of this is. Someone suggested doctor's surgeries or damp wool, but to me it's extremely complex, diverse sort of drink. All sorts of scents and flavours in there, including a little tiny bit of mint. Really quite enjoyable. If you wanted to try some of these teas, incidentally, you can buy individual sachets to try in some of the health food shops. Next, a really pretty one. Look at this gorgeous red colour. Now, this is rosehip, and I have to say I'm rather partial to a bit of rosehip. Lovely scents of the hedgerow. It really smells and tastes like what it comes from, a rosehip. Nice bit of bitterness in there, though, from the tannin. Reminds me a bit of wine. Extremely good. I might say it's supposed to be good for diarrhea. And lastly, peppermint. You know what peppermint tastes like, smells like? Chewing gum. Us rural types think it smells like wild mint. So much for the individual varieties. Gentlemen, I wonder if you'd help and taste these blends made up from mixtures of several of the herbs.
Well, while our distinguished sippers bring their collective judgment to bear, we have a new food and drink challenge for you. You'll remember Italian restaurateur Antonio Carluccio from the last series. We followed him on a gastronomic tour of northern Italy. At the time, we had a letter from Nika Watt, who lives in Essex. She told us that her husband, Keith, is a fireman who loves cooking, particularly for his crew at their fire station. Couldn't he go to Italy, she asked. Well, yes, but not until next week. First, we sent Antonio along to the fire station, Dowgate, in the City of London, to help Keith cook Sunday lunch. The budget is a princely £1.50 a head.
There we are, I'm ready for the challenge.
Is this what we got for dinner?
Yes.
Looks lovely.
Shall we go?
Yes, I shall.
Where shall we go?
Straight upstairs.
Okay.
I've got some decent grub in there, eh?
We have chicken legs, some bacon, some Parmesan cheese,
It's a bit expensive for us, the Parmesan cheese.
Well, I mean, you could substitute it with well-matured cheddar.
Yeah, something strong cheese.
Yes, it's a lovely taste. Then breadcrumbs, a little bit of garlic, parsley, mortadella, and eggs. And you start in taking the chicken leg, which I suppose it cost about 50p or something like that, and bone it. This is the most important aspect of the whole thing here, that you bone a leg of a chicken to obtain a sort of flat piece of meat which you can fill. Take away the pieces. And the most important thing is not to pierce the skin, because it will hold the filling. And with this you can do a lovely soup as well, obviously. So we have now a piece of meat like that. With all these ingredients, I made already some filling. This is eggs, Parmesan, breadcrumbs, which I softened with a little bit of milk, just a little bit of garlic, the parsley and the mortadella. Now you close everything like that, you put into your hand, and then you take a slice of bacon to seal the whole thing. The important thing now, the juggling pick, is this one. You have to take a little bit of string and bind it to obtain a sort of sausage, which we will provide of a nice little bowl, and then will be fried on each side.
Yet to sample Antonio's highly strung chicken, Keith's colleagues have been out on the front line, dealing with another red alert and working up an appetite. Keith is learning fast.
Don't bind your finger.
It's the tricky bit.
It's not that tricky, it's just a little bit of, exercise. I have a lot of patience for things like that. Wonderful. The string has only the task to hold everything together. Perfection. Well done, Keith.
Seems easy enough.
Yes.
Antonio has set his sights higher than simply chicken. To go with it, sliced potatoes and onions with rosemary cooked in olive oil.
Here, up to you.
Thank you. Yep. You don't have to cover this then.
No, just like that.
Is it a hot oven?
Yes, a very hot oven.
And how long will they take in here?
About 40 minutes, 45 minutes.
Should be ready by 1 o'clock then?
Yes, but certainly.
Okay.
So there we are now. Can you pass me the last ones? I put those here.
These are just shallow fried in the olive oil?
Yes, not very much olive oil, just a little bit, because the skin and the chicken will leave some fat anyway. And then you turn each side. And when each side is beautiful, crispy and brown, they are cooked inside as well.
Courgette to go with the stuffed chicken. Something of a change from bangers and mash for a ravenous fire crew. And while the potatoes and onions are still cooking, so is the put. Pears simmering in white wine for 40 minutes. Strangely exotic in a kitchen more used to custard, and all for under £1.50 a head.
Lovely potatoes. Now we have here dishing out here for the devils.
Come on
Quite the bunch, eh?
Give him a chance, he's a new boy.
Gentlemen, this is the food here.
Thank you very much.
And this for you.
Chickens are still going cheap.
And I hope you enjoyed.
Lucky on my seafood, darling.
Taste it first. Taste it first, because it may be that it's already good or so. Cut it like that. No, like that. Slice it like that. So I hope you will enjoy it, gentlemen.
It's all right.
And this is, you like it?
Yeah, but they're rub it together.
Pausing only to autograph their plates and invite instant indigestion, the team head out of the frying pan into the fire.
Interesting. John and BM2. Who is this, John?
That's mine, yeah.
That's it. Voilà. So, I hope it wasn't very difficult, your operations, and now finally you can eat your food.
Yeah, lovely.
Did you discover the garlic? No.
Yeah, we found it.
Yeah? Yeah, because I know that you are very sensitive on garlic.
What mean? And sugar. Thank you, Antonio. Cinnamon. Got my finger on it now. Really nice.
So, lads, what do you think about this meal?
Very nice. We only got called out the once. Very
Well,
Beaten by the bell, Antonio gives in gracefully to superior firepower. The firemen were possibly the most unorthodox diners he's fed, but they're among the best pleased.
I must say there were similarities to cooking at home, them getting up and running off all the time. Testament to great food, though, and it looks as good the second time around. Now onto these mixed herbal teas. How have you got on, Professor Lacey?
Well, not very well, I'm afraid. This one isn't too bad. That tastes like dilute cough medicine, but really, I suppose they're all right, but not for me.
They're not for you.
No.
I think you've chosen the Rooibos there, which is for, I think, enfeebled digestions. Maybe that's suitable.
Well, I don't know.
Dr. Lang, I hope you came out a bit better with the mixed herbals.
Well, I'm just very pleased that there is now more of a range of herb teas, because if you don't like to drink a lot of tea or coffee, it's good news, whatever we think about them. If some of them are disgusting or some are nice, it's just good there are more about.
But some are nice?
Some are nice, yes. I particularly like the tropical one because it was basically hibiscus. But my only criticism is they're all still far too expensive, and
About
that really
5p
needs
a
to be
bag.
changed.
Sir Richard, which was your favourite?
Well, I think lemon and lime, I'll take that away any time, but so far as the others are concerned, I think I've drunk too many thousands of gallons of Indian tea for my taste buds to appreciate them as much as I would wish.
Thank you, gentlemen, very much. And I hope our audience won't be discouraged from trying some of these teas, because there is a wide range available, and very widely available in the shops too, in grocers, supermarkets and health food shops.
Well, actually, I have to say that the peppermint's my favourite, but I think that's because it helps the digestion a little bit much. If you're an egg lover like me and you've been feeling deprived over the last few weeks, since we, 6 weeks or so ago, started explaining about the salmonella, here's 3 lovely egg recipes that are absolutely terrific. They can be made either with hen's egg, or if you like, you can make it with quail's eggs, available in all supermarkets now. They're small, but they have a lovely, rich, intense flavour, rather like old-fashioned eggs used to taste like. The main recipe I'm going to do is from Wales. It's called Anglesey eggs, and quite rightly for a Welsh recipe. It's got leeks in it. When you buy leeks, trim them, wash them really carefully to get rid of the sand, then cut them into inch lengths and fry them in just a little butter for a moment until they soften, and put them in a big gratin dish like this. A layer of slightly cooked leeks at the bottom, and you need then, for about 1.5 pounds of leeks, this is for 4 people, 6 hard-boiled eggs. Now, there's a trick with hard-boiled eggs, as there is with most things. If you dip a knife into cold water before you cut them, and then cut them cleanly, you don't get the egg falling to pieces the way they so often do when you try and cut them otherwise. Just put the eggs in an attractive-ish pattern on the leeks, and you make yourself a white sauce. Now, there's a crafty white sauce recipe, which I'm going to demonstrate now, which is much simpler than all the roux methods, the stirring methods that used to be. Put into a saucepan 1/2 pint of milk. This is a luxury white sauce. You can do it just with milk if you like, but if you're feeling like a little luxury to go with your eggs, that's 1/4 pint of single cream. In addition to that, you put in 1.5 tablespoonfuls of flour. This is into the cold milk, and if you think I'm crazy, I'll show you how it works in a minute. You then put 1 ounce to 1.5 ounces of butter in, and just 1/4 to 1/2 teaspoon of ground bay leaf, and the same of ground nutmeg. You can add a pinch of salt if you like. What you do now is you whisk it till the flour dissolves thoroughly into the milk while it's still cold. And then you stir it over a low heat, and what happens is the flour and the butter mix as the butter melts, and as you finish stirring it, just as it comes to the boil, you wind up with an effortless, silky smooth white sauce. That's what you put over the eggs. It only takes about 2 or 3 minutes, and you can't leave it alone. The one great thing to remember about this white sauce is that it doesn't take long, but if you walk away from it, it's the one moment guaranteed when it boils and it all goes lumpy. So you've got to stay with it while it thickens, and then you get the effort-free, crafty white sauce. You spread that so that it covers all the eggs and as much of the leeks as possible. It'll spread a little bit while it's cooking. And then, get the last bit out if I can. There we are. And then a slight Italian touch to go with the Welshness. Some Parmesan. It doesn't have to be fresh grated like this, but if you can, the flavour's incomparably better than the grated stuff you buy already done for you. It's a great luxury, good Parmesan. Tastes wonderful. And a couple of tablespoonfuls of real breadcrumbs. And this whole lot goes under the grill for about 2 minutes while I show you the other quick ideas for hard-boiled eggs. If you've got half a dozen or so hard-boiled eggs, you put a little cider vinegar, a tablespoonful of sugar, and a few pickling spices together, and you boil them till the sugar's dissolved, and then you just pour them warm, not hot, over the shelled hard-boiled eggs, and covering them as best you can, and then seal the lid down tight, leave them for 2 weeks, and they make the most wonderful thing to have with a ploughman's or with hors d'oeuvre if you can. And one last idea from China. Very simple thing, hard-boiled egg, tapped gently all over with a spoon till the shell's mazed, and then you boil it again with some black Kemoon tea, about a tablespoonful, until about 2 hours later, if that doesn't sound too terrifying, they've taken on the most wonderful patina under the shells. The colour of the tea will have gone through it. They won't taste of tea, they'll taste of hard-boiled eggs, but they've got the most beautiful marbled surface. And they look beautiful. You can eat them with a little Chinese cooked salt and pepper. The details will be in the fact sheet. Now then, what I need to do is to get the Anglesey eggs out, which have just glazed at the top. And the cheese has melted and the breadcrumbs have browned, and it's a wonderful summer dish.
Italo Welsh eggs. Brilliant, aren't they?
It's lovely. It's
They're
very
so
simple and
versatile,
cheap.
aren't they? Yeah.
Yeah, such
Wonderful.
a pity we've had all the trouble.
Yes, absolutely. Michael, thank you. As always, the recipes and information from this week and last week can be obtained by sending a cheque or post order, please, for 60p and make it payable to BSS. The address is Food and Drink Fact Sheet 5, P.O. Box 7, London W3, 6XJ. That's Food and Drink Fact Sheet 5, P.O. Box 7, London W3, 6XJ. Please, please make sure you put your name and address in with your request, otherwise we really can't oblige. And you'll also find the information on CFAX, page 288. Now, organic farming hit the headlines this month when Prince Charles said that there was growing anxiety about the consequences of modern intensive farming, adding,
Farmers and policymakers must be shown that organic farming is a viable approach to agriculture.
over the years, Food and Drink has charted the beginnings of organic farming. What's new is a much more widespread concern about conventional farming methods, concern about damage to the atmosphere from nitrogen fertilizers, concern about damage to topsoil from erosion caused by over-fertilization and loss of hedgerows. Then there's the worry about chemical residues in fruit and vegetables, and about the level of nitrates in water, which the government is taking very seriously. Our Good Food report this week comes from news journalist John Humphreys, who's been involved in the organic movement himself.
What do you mean organic? You mean with no chemicals, just lots and lots of manure?
Yep, the natural approach. They used to be called the muck and mystery men. It'll be a damned hard slog for the first few years.
Patrick Holden was farming organically long before Pat and Tony Archer. Now he spends his whole life spreading the organic gospel as director of British Organic Farmers. He spread it to me several years ago when I had my own dairy farm just a few miles from here, and I tried it myself, not very successfully as it turned out, because like most other people, I'd no real idea what it involves. It's a science, just as any form of agriculture is a science. But the big difference is that if things go wrong when you're farming conventionally, you turn to chemicals to make them go right again. You stop the weeds growing with chemicals. You stop the bugs attacking the plants with chemicals. You help the crops give bigger yields with chemicals. At the risk of sounding melodramatic, the tram lines used by chemical-spraying tractors are like the scars on a junkie's arm. The fact is, if you know what you're doing, you can do it without chemicals. Admittedly, you can't get 3 to 4 tons of wheat from an acre of land without chemicals. But then, we don't need all the grain we've been growing. On the contrary, it cost us a fortune to store it all. There was no nitrogen used to grow the grass which has gone into the silage these cows live off. And the cows themselves won't be routinely injected with chemicals and antibiotics as they would be on a conventional farm. Again, they don't produce quite as much milk. But again, remember the European butter mountains and the milk lakes and the need for quotas. The question is, of course, does it matter that conventional farmers use so many chemicals like nitrogen and herbicides and pesticides so routinely?
I think it matters probably more than any other environmental issue of our time. I know this is the food and drink programme, but when people buy food, they make choices. They make choices not simply about protecting their own health and perhaps about buying better tasting food, but the other implications of their purchases are on the environment and on the contamination of our planet. And this is happening simply all over the world.
But the skeptics would say, look, we've been eating conventionally produced food for donkey's years, and it's not doing us any harm.
I don't think we can afford to wait for science to prove that there's a danger, as no doubt proof will be found in a few years' time. And I think we have a moral responsibility to change the way that we farm, and I believe that consumers can help farmers make that change by buying organically grown food in the shop.
But of course, we all know, don't we, that organic food is really just for the odd dedicated few, for the cranks. After all, it's not as if you can buy whatever you want, wherever you want, whenever you want it. We know that, don't we? Well, let me show you something else that I got involved in a few years ago. All the cheese here is organic, which means it's made from milk produced on farms like Patrick Holden's, where the grass has had no nitrogen and the cows have not been routinely treated with chemicals. As from last month, this Pencarig cheese was available in every Safeway supermarket in the land. And this is a very small operation compared with what's happening in the factory next door. Everything you see here is organic. They handle more than £2 million worth of fruit and veg every year. And what they can't buy in Britain, they import. The driving force, the inspiration behind all this is himself an organic farmer, Peter Seger. He's convinced that this is just a beginning.
A year ago, if you remember, we were only just coming out of the ghetto, just beginning to develop, and now we're in the mainstream right throughout the country. Every month that goes by, more supermarkets make the product more available in more towns and more cities right throughout the land.
But the fact is, you cannot compete with the big conventional farmers in terms of price and in terms of quantity and availability and all the rest of it.
But we can beat them on flavour, taste, healthier product, and making a better contribution to a healthier and cleaner environment. And that is what more and more people are looking for.
Well, there's the argument for organic farming. Next week, conventional farmer Oliver Walston argues that chemical fertilisers and pesticides are vital to modern agriculture. Meanwhile, those of you who buy organic vegetables will be pleased to know that the businessman Malcolm Parkinson has announced plans to sell them in 200 outlets across Britain. And elsewhere, the confusion over standards is near to being sorted out, and that's a relief. By midsummer, organic produce like this will all have to come from farms which conform to one strict set of rules. For instance, they'll have had to have been free of chemical fertilisers and pesticides for at least 2 years. Let's hope they can also sort out a single logo. For the moment, there are at least 3 logos to look for. Here on the carrots, the Soil Association's one. That of the organic farmers and growers here on these oats. And, of course, some shops simply label their produce as organic, like these leeks.
High time for rationalisation, as they say. Next week, Antonio and Keith are off to Italy. Michael cooks trout, and Gilly tastes a range of new apple drinks.
Join us then. Until then, goodbye.
Goodbye.